The Emerald Tablet, Chapter 28. It's a good thing Benjamin has the keys. The summer was passing quickly, and with it, so were Benjamin's hopes of finding the third key of Shambhala. The primary focus of all the Year 1 Denarians, including the members of the Alliance, had become the upcoming ability tests. Tests designed to measure each student's abilities so more focused teaching could be given in summers to come. As the summer passed, it was more evident which subjects students would test well in and which subjects would require more basic instruction. Heidi would no doubt test the highest in the class for telepathy, but her telekinesis skills had improved little over the course of the summer. Gary excelled at science, but had nearly as little telekinesis ability as Heidi. "Well, at least we'll be in the same telekinesis class next summer," Gary said to cheer Heidi up one day. "Even you'll probably skip ahead of me, Gary. I think I've actually gotten worse," Heidi said, planting her chin in her hands. "Oh, you have not," Iva said. "You're just imagining things. And, plus, just think about how good you are at telepathy." Heidi smiled at her friend, though it didn't reach her eyes. The members of the Alliance were like all the Telligent students in one regard. Their entire lives they'd grown up being the smartest kids in the class, never having to work hard for a grade, never having to stay up late reading or doing homework. In short, school had been way too easy. Too easy, that is, until they came to Lemuria. Now, for the first time in their lives, they were challenged. They didn't excel at everything they studied. Teachers knew their skills and pressed them to work harder. They were pitted against each other in trials continuously, and every time they lost one of these challenges, they were forced to work all the harder. Benjamin tried his best to split his little free time between practicing for the ability tests and searching for some sign of the third key of Shambhala. Heidi, Iva, Gary, and Andy helped him as much as they could, but they, too, were busy practicing. With summer's end fast approaching, Benjamin was running out of ideas. Gary had even managed to find a backdoor encrypted method for using their sheaths to access the human internet. Benjamin had searched the whole thing for some clue, but, like everything else, it came up empty. As if they weren't busy enough, taking up their free time 2 nights a week was lecture. Their favorite lecture for everyone had been the night genetic engineering was discussed. Mr. Hermes had given a detailed history of genetic engineering, adding to what Proteus had mentioned the first day of class. Jack the Nautical had attended the lecture with Benjamin, adding his own commentary as required. After the initial crackdown to prevent genetically engineered humanoids and telegenoids, the practice of genetic engineering again became more common, though highly controlled. In today's world, there were scientists and science academies full of genetic engineering work. It was still taboo to engineer any type of human or telegen, though research was still done on the subject. Benjamin overheard rumors that the people of Atlantis had no restrictions in place regarding genetically engineered humans and telegens, and that the continent had become more genetically synthesized than natural. Mr. Hermes assured him this was strictly rumor, but it still made for an interesting topic of debate. The week after the lecture on genetic engineering, the first guest lecturer appeared, and Benjamin and Andy couldn't have been more surprised when Mr. Burton, their science teacher from Virginia, walked into the lecture hall. Mr. Hermes walked to the center of the room and began to speak. "I would like to introduce you to our lecturer for this evening, Mr. Canias Burton, an agent for Lemuria who functions as a middle school science teacher in Virginia." Mr. Burton smiled and replaced Mr. Hermes at the center of the room. "Hi, I'm Canias Burton, as Mr. Hermes told you. I know a handful of you and have even had the opportunity to teach a couple of you back in Virginia. I'm here tonight to talk to you about what it's really like to be an agent. Now, if I am correct, every single one of you has been an agent your entire life and had no idea. Is that right?" This elicited a small round of laughter from the students. "Well, I myself have been an agent for over 10 years, and am considered one of the best in the business. In fact, Benjamin Holt and Andy Grow, whom I taught back in Virginia, had no idea I even had telegen abilities, right?" Benjamin and Andy nodded. "One of the most important skills to have as an agent is good telepathy. Being able to read a human's mind is important. If any thoughts are detected with strange suspicions about yourself, it's an automatic yellow light to be more cautious with your skills. Skills should never be demonstrated in public, especially not for fun." He looked pointedly at Benjamin and Andy. Benjamin thought of the time they'd levitated a frog onto a classmate's head and smiled. If you find that your life is in danger, or the life of someone you are protecting is in danger, then the use of abilities at that point is sometimes required, but should never be flaunted. The humans on Earth would have to throw away everything they believed in if they were to find out that a race of superior beings existed. Instantly, everything they knew would be gone. Suspicions would be everywhere. It would be assumed that those in power, those successful, were telegens. Society as they know it would have to be completely restructured. As Mr. Burton talked, Benjamin began to realize how much of what he said caused things he'd noticed in his whole life to fall into place. Why were his dad and Joey Duncan so quiet about their work? Why did his parents insist on mind-blocking all their interesting conversations? The life of being an agent was full of mystery, secrecy, danger, and intrigue. It was just like being a spy. As interesting as the lecture was, Benjamin was thankful when it lasted only 2 hours. He was getting more exhausted every day, the still unfound third key of Shambhala weighing on his mind. After the lecture, Benjamin, Gary, and Andy lagged behind as the other students filed out of the auditorium. They walked up to the center of the room. "Hey, Mr. Burton," Andy said. "Great to see you." "Yeah," Benjamin said. "You should have told us you were going to be the lecturer for tonight." "I was hoping it would be a surprise," Mr. Burton answered, smiling at them. "It's good to see you all. How have things been since I saw you last? Have you been keeping busy?" "Oh, more busy than you could ever imagine," Andy said. "As if getting ready for the ability tests isn't enough, Benjamin always seems to have some extra task for us to work on." He laughed. "What kind of extra tasks?" Mr. Burton asked. Benjamin felt his blood get hot. How dare Andy even suggest what they'd been working on? It was nobody's business but the members of the Alliance. "Oh, nothing," Benjamin said. "Just extra research on the history of Lemuria." He lied, hoping his face hadn't gotten red. "You know, the history of Lemuria is actually fascinating. It's hard to believe it's really as old as they say it is." "Yes, I remember when I found out about Lemuria being 900,000 years old. I thought my homeroom teacher was lying," Mr. Burton said, apparently not noticing Benjamin's lie. "Did you grow up in Lemuria, or were your parents agents like ours?" Benjamin asked, still trying to steer the subject away from their activities. "I grew up in the U.S., just like you boys. However, when I was only a year or two older than you are now, my parents were killed by a common criminal," Mr. Burton said. "After that I came to live in Lemuria with my aunt and uncle, who didn't have any children of their own." "Wow, I'm sorry to hear that," Benjamin said. "Yes, it was a real tragedy. It was death without purpose, caused by someone not worthy to wipe the dirt off my shoes," Mr. Burton replied. "Oh, the common justice system put him in jail for some nominal time period, but by the time he got out I was gone, living full-time in Lemuria." He shook his head. "But enough about that. I'm sure you boys are tired and don't want to hear me ramble on about my past. You should really get back to your room for bed." "Yeah, I guess you're right, but I am sorry about your parents," Benjamin said. "Thank you," Mr. Burton said. "I appreciate that, Benjamin." "And it's good to see you again," Andy said. "Even though summer school is way cool and all, I still miss home, and seeing you reminds me of it." "Yes, well, just keep in mind I won't be cutting you two any slack next year in science class," Mr. Burton said. "I expect you to be both the best and the worst students. I'll be keeping a close watch on you." By the time they reached the boys' dorms, Benjamin felt like the only reason his eyelids were still open was because he didn't have the energy to shut them. Gary entered their room first, ready to throw himself down on the bed. He walked into the room and stopped. "Uh-oh," he said. "Uh-oh what?" Andy asked. "You guys need to take a look at this," Gary said. Benjamin and Andy walked in behind him, immediately stopping as Gary had done. The entire room was trashed. Books were everywhere. Clothes were scattered about, the wardrobes had all been forced open, and all the contents removed. Sheets had been torn off the beds, and their desks were upturned. "Whoa! What happened in here?" Benjamin asked. "Looks like someone broke in while we were at the lecture," Gary said. "Iva's not going to be happy about this," Andy said. "Is anything missing? Are they missing? Are you still keeping them with you?" he asked Benjamin. Benjamin put his hands in his pockets, feeling the carved keys under his palms. "They're safe. I have them right here." "You really think someone broke in looking for the keys?" he asked. "Why else would someone ransack our whole room?" Andy replied. "Not my books," Gary said, picking up the treasured books he'd brought with him. "Man, I hope they didn't tear any of the pages. Do you think we should tell someone?" "Who would we tell?" Benjamin said. "Nobody knows what we're doing, and anyway, who could we trust?" "I don't know," Gary said. "Maybe Proteus Ajax, or Mr. Burton, or even Morpheus Midas, or the Panther, or someone. I mean, someone broke into our room and trashed it. What if it's that Telegen from the chess tournament? Morpheus should know." "No, I agree with Benjamin," Andy said. "We don't tell anyone except Heidi and Iva. We can't trust anyone. I mean, for all we know, Morpheus Midas could have been the one who broke in here while we were in the lecture." "I don't think Morpheus would do that," Gary said. "Well, I don't either," Andy said, "but all I'm trying to say is that nobody is above suspicion. Nobody except us, that is," Benjamin said. "That's right," Andy agreed. "Nobody except us."